everybody. So nice to see you again. And I'm really excited you could spend a few minutes out of your day to sit down with us as we consider the source. So I'm really excited about today's episode. We're joined today by Laura Raiffe, who is the founder and CEO of Art Liaison. Hey, Laura.
Hey, Mike. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's so great to see you.
Great to see you too.
So I just gave like the very quick pitch on who you are, but why don't you tell us in your own words a little bit about who you are and what you do at Art Liaison?
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Laura Raiffe. I'm a mom boss and Miami native, and I work as an art advisor in the Miami community, but we really expand to a global outreach. I come from an art history, gallery, and auction background to be able to independently advise clients, whether they're trying to build up a collection and add pieces to their home, or they have amassed a collection and now they want to sell off some pieces. We help them put together a strategy, tackle the whole thing, and make it a really fun experience for them in what is otherwise quite a nuanced industry.
Very cool. So kind of what we're here to talk about today is the idea of investing in art, or art is an asset class. And so we at Omnia here, we're building portfolios, and it sounds like you're doing something very similar, Laura. So can you talk to me a little bit about, like, one, I guess, starting with the basics, how do we know what art is worth? How do we keep track of the value of these things? Kind of kick it off with that.
Sure. So like I said, we're dealing with a very opaque market, a very nuanced market. So unlike other types of asset classes, the art world is not really keen on adding transparency. That's where I come in. I love adding transparency to the art world, but it's not so readily available. So I think that, to your point, art is definitely an amazing alternative asset and could really be added to diversify a general portfolio. But art, there's so much that goes into art. So there's really a lot of different things you should think of when you're doing an investment. And you had asked me earlier about like what people should think about as art for an investment standpoint. And I would say that for sure, you should only buy what you love, but within what you love, you should be doing research. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions out there. Oh, I only buy what I love. Well, sure. Like, no one suggested you buy a house you don't love either, but you clearly did research there too. So I think that when you're choosing to invest in art, that also may indicate at a higher price point, at which point you really want to be doing research and seeing if that artist has had a track record to substantiate some of that price.
It's funny, and you said, I love that you're using the word love, right? Because we're talking about emotions, and sure, there's investment and there's the cold, hard dollars and cents of it. But I'm curious if you could talk a little more about, in a way, like the emotional side of it. How do we look at a piece of art and love it, and maybe not love it too much where we're willing to pay anything for it? Do you have experience? I'm wondering if you could talk to sort of that behavioral, emotional side of it.
Definitely. I think that art is a very emotional thing, and I want it to hit you with that wow factor. I want you to see it and you can't stop thinking about it. When you're buying, there's one thing to see a piece of art in a museum, and there's another thing to have it for your house. Something that is a very powerful thing in the art world is when it's giving you that wow factor. A question to ask yourself is that the type of wow factor you want to pass by in your living room every day? Maybe yes, maybe no. Some of the other questions you want to kind of be mindful of when you look at a piece, now that you know you love it, now that it's giving you that really good vibe, I think now is the time to start asking questions. Who is this artist? Where are they showing? Are they represented by one gallery or several? Is it in one city or all over the world? Do they have different markets? Has this artist shown in many museums before? One time or 50 times? Is this artist selling already at auction on the secondary resale market? If the answer is yes to a lot of those things, fantastic. If the answer is no to a lot of those things, I think that's important to know too. Maybe it still gives you the warm feeling, and maybe if it's at a price point that you feel comfortable with, you should still go for it. I'm not suggesting that you should only look at artists that have had museum shows and are already at auction. But I do think that those are parameters that you should be considering if you're willing to invest at a higher price point.
It's interesting you say that. So talking about that idea of maybe a more established artist versus an emerging artist,
Yeah.
I know there's so many different genres of art too. And in our world, we think so much about diversification, right? You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. So if you could talk a little bit about how you think about that idea of diversification as you're building out a portfolio of art.
A really good question. I think that diversification is important, because that putting all your eggs in one basket thing really does apply. Surely most people don't go into building a collection thinking about their exit strategy. I mean, some do, but most don't go into it with that. But it does come up, whether it's in 5 years or 50 years. At some point, we do want to think about some of those things. So with some of the emerging artists, you have a little bit more risk, but a little bit more of potential reward if you can come in at a lower entry point. If you want to have more of a safe and secure investment is when you start going for more blue chip established artists that are more notable and more well known, but that will require maybe a higher entry point. Then you want to start being a little strategic about how to slice and dice that, because not everyone, wants to go into it saying, I want something that's stable like a blue chip artist, but I have already $1 million to commit to that. Usually that's not the initial case. So that's where you want to start being thoughtful about the medium that it's created on. A painting and something that's one of a kind is the most expensive because it's the most rare. But a step down from a painting is a work on paper, which is still a unique piece, but because it's on paper and it may be a drawing instead of an oil canvas, it may be much more accessible from a price point. If even that's still a bit of a jump, you may want to consider prints or editions by that artist. So now it comes from an edition of 6 or 60 or 250, but that will bring the price point even more accessible. So now you can have a Picasso or a Warhol in your house, but maybe it's a print by Warhol, which, by the way, a Warhol or Picasso print could very well become a mega investment too. So these things do ebb and flow. When you're going to go after an emerging artist, you may be able to get a huge painting for under $10,000. That's fantastic. But because that artist is accessible and at the beginning of their career, like with other types of assets, without that track record, one doesn't know how it's going to perform in the long run. So that's where you have to balance out your risk appetite and the level that you're willing to start off with from a financial standpoint.
I love these parallels, Laura, of risk appetite and the idea of risk and reward, and really diversifying, not only call it the vintage or established and emerging, but also all the different mediums. And there's really a lot to consider when you're taking, I think, an intentional approach to building out an art portfolio. So I can see why somebody like you would be really valuable in that sort of conversation.
The funny thing is, Michael, is that, as I like to say, bad art is not less expensive. So it's not like you get some sort of deal by going after, artists with no track record. And quite the opposite. You're going to be met with like a bit of shock and horror when you've spent big bucks on a piece that actually has nothing to stand behind. So definitely being very strategic about this, I think, is the best way to go. For me, a little bit of my passion lies in the intersection of art and business. So I think when you can apply both of those philosophies, it definitely yields some better results on the outcome.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. You mentioned another phrase that I loved, exit strategy. So I imagine, look, people are buying art because they love the art and I assume, want to hold on to it. I assume there are other people that are more like traders of art, where you're buying and you're selling pieces. So we've talked a lot about, the things you want to think about when you're buying a piece of art. What are the things people should be thinking about when they're potentially going to sell a piece of art? And how do we know when it's time?
It's a really good question. In fact, my practice actually started off when I was doing independent advisory with helping people on the sales side. That's really where we got our start, because buying art can be a little bit more subjective, but the sales side is, definitely methodical for sure, and definitely takes a strategic hat. There's a few tips that I would give people. The first one is that aesthetic value and market value are not always aligned. So that means that the piece that your grandmother loves the most may or may not be the most valuable. And that random piece from the hallway that everyone was passing over actually could be quite valuable. So I think we need to research everything. There's always surprises, some of the better, some of the worse. The second thing to keep in mind is to gather all of your paperwork. When you buy something, usually you'll get a gallery invoice and maybe a certificate of authenticity. Over the years, you may be doing appraisals or insurance updates. Really, I cannot stress how valuable it is to just keep all of those papers in one little art folder in your filing cabinet. So whenever you're ready to do anything, like even just know what you have it all written out there. Otherwise, some of my clients that are hiring me that are further along in their life and have been collecting for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, some of them keep amazing records and we know what we're dealing with. Sometimes we joke that we're part-time art detectives because we have no idea what we're dealing with and we have to find all of that out. So if you have that information available, it really helps. And then the other thing that I would say is keep your ear to the ground. If you hear that an artist is having mega success, sounds like it's a good time to me. The art world's quite fickle. Waves don't ride forever. So yes, surely some artists are much more stable than others, but even using an artist like Warhol as an example, Warhol's been doing very well right now. In other years past, it was a little sleepier. So would you consider him still at a super high point? Of course we would, but artists have moments like stocks do that they're more in favor or less in favor. So if you've been thinking about it and you have all your info together and now you hear that the artist is doing amazing at auction, it's definitely time to consider.
We're recording this video in late 2022. So far this year, let's say stocks are down 15%, the bond market is down similarly. The idea of art as its own asset class, how is the art market done this year? And really, how do we think about the performance of art over the long term?
Sure. So I would say that art is definitely correlated to traditional financial markets, but they're not the same. So when everyone's going up, yes, there's a lot more participants at the sales. And when things are going down, there is a little bit less movement. Sure. That being said, they are separate markets. And I feel like art has done a really fantastic job of maintaining its store of wealth and value over the long run. And I think that especially when you go after artists that have more of that track record, the stock market's not changing the value on a Picasso. It's just not. Maybe there are some days that is better to put it up for sale than other days. Maybe sometimes you'd have 3 bidders and other times 13 bidders. But I don't think that, and that's where it's helpful to have an art advisor guide you on the right timing for those things. But generally speaking, I think that art has been a great store of wealth. And I think that buyers are being very sophisticated, increasingly more in the information age, and they're really keeping an eye out on quality. And so I say that so that, you can, when you're starting to look at pieces, if there's an artist you love, you should try to do some more research. Ask the gallery, what else do they make? What else is there to see? So that at least that when you're going after that piece, it's the best one that you can get your hands on. And then you'll feel more comfortable with it as a store of wealth for the long run. I think it is really worth asking more questions versus less.
Sure. Again, you got to do your due diligence, right?
It's shocking how many people aren't really trying to do that in the art world. But it's important.
Emotional, right? You love the piece, you buy the piece, and then you think about this stuff maybe later when you're thinking about selling it. bring it a little close to home, right? We're both Miami based.
Yeah.
It's coming out around Basel time. So
Oh, it
do you have
is.
any pro tips, any actionable stuff for people who are trying to go out and brave the shows, or really, would love to hear from somebody like you doing what you do when we're at Basel? What should we be looking for? What's the deal?
Sure. Good question, Michael. And there's a lot of moving pieces during Art Basel. You know, the first thing that I would say is don't feel pressure.
Mm.
There's a lot happening at one time. I think Art Basel really serves as the best tool to be able to see a ton of art. And I think that when some collectors, some people really know what they love already. Fantastic. So then once you know what you love, you can really start to dive deep on that. And Art Basel does represent some of the best galleries and some of the best artists, so you can really see that. But a lot of people I talk to know that they like some art, but not other types of art, and quite frankly, don't really know what they like. That's okay too. I think the best thing I would say is to really start going through Art Basel, whether it's the Art Basel Convention Center Fair, Art Miami, Untitled, whatever. I want you to take out your phone and start snapping pictures of everything that you like. What do you like? Forget the pricing. Forget if it's sold. What do you like? And then when you go home, you can start to Google these people. Don't feel pressure that you have to buy it that day. You don't have to buy anything any one day. If you do, you would have already known that you needed to buy something. We would have already been talking about it. So if there's something that you really love and ultimately you really feel like it's the right fit, keep walking around the fair, see how it sits with you. How do you feel that night? Talk to the dealer, talk to the gallery person, learn more about that artist. Where do they live? What are they up to? You can ask for their CV, which is their resume, and see where the artist has shown before. Use that as time to ask questions and do some exploration. And if in a few hours, a few days later, you can't stop thinking about it, you're still really excited about it, they had good answers to your questions, well, great. That may definitely be something worth pursuing. But if not, then at least you gave yourself a little bit of time to marinate over it. And my other piece of advice is plan your day based on location, so you're not spending it on the road, because there is ridiculous traffic and parking's a disaster. So plan based on geography when possible.
I think all really good points. So Laura, I want to thank you so much for your time today, your knowledge. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure people watching did too. I mean, and there's so many parallels, right? You got to do your due diligence. You don't want to act solely on emotion. You've got to really be intentional with the way that you're building, your portfolio. And so those are some of my takeaways. Again, Laura, I want to thank you so much. If there's anything you want to add, please go ahead, but really, really appreciate your time. And I just want to thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Feel free to visit us on our website, artmarketliaison.com. And otherwise, Michael, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to collaborate.
Great. And happy Basel.
Thanks. You too. Happy Basel.
Thanks so much for watching. As always, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. You can also find more content on our Omnia Family Wealth YouTube page, or check out our latest videos by clicking on these links.